Now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of what Indians are all about.
I still say we Indian people are believers in the truth. This is the way of life that was given to your people. You're born an Indian, you're going to die an Indian. Indianness is a good life. You're facing an Indian this afternoon.
This week on Muskogee Vision. 2019 is an election year at the Muskogee Creek Nation, with the primary election being held on September 21st and the general election on November 2nd. The Creek Nation is made up of 8 districts, with a Seat A and Seat B councilperson for each district. This year, Seat A of each district, as well as the new principal chief and second chief, will be elected. As part of Muskogee Media's election coverage, the citizens were asked on social media to submit ideas for questions to be posed to the candidates. After hundreds of submissions, the editorial staff refined the topics down to 5 questions. Every candidate was provided these questions and offered a time to come into Muskogee Media studio to record their answers. Afterwards, the responses were compiled into videos covering each district and the principal and second chief offices. In the coming weeks before the September 21st primary, Muskogee Vision will be airing these video profiles on the program, in some cases edited to run in the allotted time. This week we feature Tuckabutchee and Muskogee districts, and all of the video profiles are currently available on the Muskogee Vision YouTube channel. And thanks for watching Muskogee Vision.
The issue on blood quantum has not come up a whole lot while I've been in term. I think it may be a few individuals that thinks it needs to be changed, but I think there should be something like a forum or community discussions on this issue, and then if there's enough people that feel like it should, then it should, when they go through the process getting it on a ballot, then the people would make their choice on this issue.
The first question says, do you support removing the blood quantum requirement from Muskogee Creek Nation public office? I support dialogue to discuss this matter, and I think that possibly there would be a lot more understanding and there would be a lot more clarification of the ramifications, if you will, of changing the blood quantum requirement. I know that you can't deny the fact that an overwhelming majority of our citizens are now quarter blood or less than quarter blood, and I think that's got to be considered. But in order to consider that, I think there needs to be discussion and formal discussion with everyone that has an interest in this matter. So as a representative, I think we represent the people, we represent the majority of the people, and if, you know, it's in our Constitution, it'll require a constitutional amendment, and I don't believe constitutional amendments should be taken lightly. They should be thought out well, they should be discussed, and before this is offered.
Hi, I'm Anna Marshall, aka Ann, known by many as Ann. I just want to state that as I answer the questions, and that's my task at hand for today, is that there'll be 5 questions that I'm going to answer. And I have, based on my experience, I'm a market researcher at one time in my life, and I'm also a certified mediator. So I always look at all perspectives when I'm proposed a question, or if an issue presents itself. I always look at all different perspectives, all the pros and the cons. And so as the first response that I have is, do I support removing the blood quantum requirement from Muskogee Creek Nation public office? I believe, after having conferred with several people across the board, my sample wasn't thousands of people, but it was a large enough group of people who I respect, and I would say that at this point, I think that we need to, I know it's an emotional issue, and sometimes, many times, we need to step back and we need to look at all of it rather than just one side of it. And for me, I think that at some point, we have to look at the timing of these questions and the timing of the issues. And as we start talking about removing the blood quantum requirement to hold public office, which would be this position of, a council representative, a chief, and a second chief. And as we look at those positions, I believe that at this moment in time, we need to have more conversation about it, because eventually in the next 10 to 20 years, that will be the question at hand. And I believe that we need to have more discussion, we need to talk about it, look at the different perspectives, and to meet a medium path and a medium ground where everyone comes out as winners rather than a win and lose situation, but that we look at how we move forward dealing with this blood quantum requirement. And this won't be the first time that we talk about this. There's going to be a lot of conversations about it, and I'm sure not just this election, but probably subsequent elections where this question will be coming up. And at this point, I would say the blood quantum requirement just needs to be looked at and talked about more. And as far as for me, I believe that the blood quantum requirement should remain as is, the 1/4.
Transparency, that's been a subject for a long time now, and I think at this point we're very transparent on what we can share with our citizens. And so I think if anybody has any other ideas, I'd be glad to listen, but I think we're pretty transparent at this point.
First of all, our investments, and I'm assuming it's talking about our investments, tribal government fund investments. First of all, the investments as they are made in various areas depending on, I guess it's the administration. And of course, the administration brings the investment firm to the council, and the council either approves or denies the investment of those funds. However, the reporting of those funds, I think, need to be a little more open, a little more formal, and those funds need to be taken a look at by our top financial folks, and to advise the council whether or not these funds are being used wisely, or if they're being invested wisely, and that should be done at least on a quarterly basis. And I know that there are reports that are being made that are made. However, I don't know just how well they're scrutinized. I know that there have been times in the past where sometimes our investments weren't scrutinized that well. And however, I think over the long run, having been involved in the tribe for several years, I saw that there's been some good investments that have been made, and I'm sure anything can be improved on. So I think that totally needs to be an open, transparent process, not only to the legislative body, but to the citizens as well.
And I know that over the past several elections and over the past several years, there's always been questions about our investments. Where are they? How's the interest rate paying back? How much have we borrowed? How much have we invested? And there are a lot of financial questions that have always been raised by our citizens. And for me, I think financial transparency, the responsibilities of the council, and particularly from my area, I would want to take the knowledge that I know about budgets, about finances, about investments, and to be able to go back and explain to my constituents or any constituents throughout the nation, and making sure that we all understand where the investments are, how they're how they're being managed and what is our return on these investments. And sometimes we're talking about financial investments. And so I would want to do that first. The way we improve it is to go back and explain these to our constituents. I've gone to some community meetings and I've been in different conversations around the nation, and I don't know that I've even had financial transparency, and I don't even know that it's been explained to me in terms that I understand.
I think we have a pretty good communication with at-large citizens. We usually go out to the citizens that live at large maybe once a year, and also I think the Muskogee media does a great job in communicating with our citizens to let them know what is going on with the nation.
Sure, absolutely. I think that at-large citizens, they constitute a great number of our citizens, a great number of our voters. They are a very large voting bloc, and regardless whether they live within any of the districts here in the Creek Nation or not, they're just as much citizens as anybody else. And so I will be open totally. I will give all of my contact information to anyone, including at-large citizens, and their interests are, I guess, somewhat unique. They're a little bit different than those that live within the Creek Nation, because there's a lot of services that aren't available to them for the simple reason that a lot of the services that are available to creeks within the boundaries are federal funds, and by federal restriction or by federal guidelines, those resources are available only to those citizens. We need to come up with maybe innovative ways to deal with that. And I think that once again, as the answer to a lot of my questions is dialogue. A lot of it is getting together with the citizens, with the leadership of the nation, to see what those types of services are, and also to provide open communication with at-large citizens. As it is now, we have a individual who is responsible for communicating for the administration to at-large citizens, and that's good. But I think that we can always improve that process.
Yes, I used to be an at-large citizen myself when I lived in New York City. And I know that the only time I ever got any communication from the nation was in regard to elections. I would get huge amounts of campaign literature, and not knowing some of the people, but there were a lot of people that I didn't know. And so I think that considering the situations that we're in now, I'm the person that wants to have a more one-on-one conversation. I want to be able to hear what your issues are. What are the ideas that you have as at-large citizens? What is your dreams and your hopes that this nation can do for you as an at-large citizen? And the way I would do that, my plan would be to make it my plan every quarter to come to your community and for you to tell me what your ideas are, what your hopes, what your dreams, your concerns, and the issues are, so that I hear them firsthand, and I don't hear them secondhand and third and fourth hand, but I do hear it from you, the people who are being affected by some of the policies of the tribe and the way that business is conducted.
Yes, I think, if the citizens want to do that, then, if the majority says that, they want a constitutional amendment, then I think it should go before them for a vote.
I support citizens being allowed to determine their own future or their own circumstances. As a legislative body, we're elected to make decisions based on what we think are in the best needs of the nation. A part of that also is that the legislative body's job is to listen to the citizens. And if once again, dialogue, if we have hearings, if we have discussion, and it appears that the majority of the Creek Nation is interested in this, I don't think we should restrict process of amending our Constitution in order to allow certain things, because, you know, even though we are a legislative body, we make those determinations. There's also a process for citizens to be involved in the constitutional change process or the change of law.
And I believe, as many people believe, I have traveled to many places in the world, and I know that there are areas of media where we don't get the true story of what really happens in places. I've been to the Middle East, I've been to Russia, and I've been to Turkey, and I know that things in Russia aren't always as bad as people think, because there's a huge respect for Native people in Russia. Not only that, but you go to Turkey, there's a huge admiration for the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. And then when I go to the Middle East, I see the situations in Palestine and the sufferings that they go through, and we never see the people of those places. We always hear about the bad things that happen. And I think it's important for our citizens to be able to say that they want to have free press. And it's a free press that's unbiased. And I know that we always have biases put into articles, how we're quoted, and things of that nature. But I think it's really important for this, to have a free press, because we want to be able to know all sides of what's going on in the administration, what's going on in the council, to be able to have a good understanding and to be able to look at our nation and say, well, we need to improve in that area, and this is what I read about this, and this is my opinion of that. And then that way we learn to work together and to have a common goal that we want this nation to be the best. We want to be able to put our imprint on the world and let people know that we're here.
My position on freedmen is very simple. I think that if you're legally eligible for membership in our nation, then so be it.
You know, it was determined in the 1979 constitutional referendum that the freedmen would be eliminated from the Muskogee Creek Nation. And I think that any time that there is a strong enough push by the majority of the citizens to amend the Constitution, you know, I have no problem with it. Anything that the majority of the Muskogee Creek Nation wants, and that includes the quarter blood issue. But we've got to be sure that this is something that the majority would want. Personally, my position on the admission of freedmen descendants, I think that I lived through the era of the 1979 Constitution, and I think that there was, once again, a lot of factors that played into the approval of that Constitution. I believe that a lot of people were excited that the Creek Nation was reorganizing. We were ready to get our own Constitution and to get our sovereignty back. And in doing that, I think there was probably a little bit of misinformation or lack of information about some of these things. I personally don't have a problem with the freedmen issue as it stands today, as it was determined in 1979. However, I will say this, I do have a little bit of problem with the fact that many people were enrolled as freedmen who had Muskogee Creek blood, and simply by the virtue of their mothers being the Creek and not the fathers, and the fathers being freedmen, they were put on freedmen rolls. Consequently, there were some freedmen who had more Creek blood than some of the or some of the regular citizens who had white blood, for example. I also know that there was some people were mistakenly added to our rolls in the original rolls who were just settlers in Oklahoma, weren't even Creek, but they somehow found a way to get enrolled, and I'm sure that there's descendants or remnants of those people around, and there are still people who are considered freedmen who are not allowed on the rolls who have Creek blood. So I think that this matter needs to be taken a look at to see, but as far as the actual pure freedmen, once again, it would take a constitutional amendment and not a legislative change by a representative or a body of representatives. So I think that would require a full discussion, and if it appears that the majority of the people would want constitutional change, that would certainly have to be considered.
And I believe that the freedmen has always been an issue, not just among our nation, but in the nations of other tribes in this state. And I believe that this is a situation that I think that people have taken it to court, and at some point we have to have the sovereignty to be able to decide for ourselves. And when we talk about that, I think this particular issue really needs to have a lot of conversation. And I don't think that there's any position that can be definitive at this point. I think all of us just need to sit down, have a conversation, just start sharing where we're at, what we feel, where we believe that this nation needs to be. And we're not going to decide it at this election. I think it may be the next 10, 20, maybe 30, 40 years. It may not even be in my lifetime, and maybe not even in your lifetime. But I think the position on admitting the freedmen is going to be a conversation piece for the next 10 to 20 years.
The most recent polls conducted by the Muskogee media regarding the requirements for National Council and the blood quantum showed that 14% was interested in and felt like blood quantum requirement was very important. By the response of the candidates who are seeking office, this election indicates we have a fair representation in all the districts of citizens who meet the blood quantum requirement. Therefore, I would not support removing the blood quantum requirement. Blood quantum was second only to education and experience, which the survey showed had 71% of interest of the citizens that responded to the poll. Maybe a better representation of how the people feel would be to do a survey out in the communities where the people live. Communication and transparency are vital to any organization. This is where education and experience is important. Transparency is critical, but trust, I think, in your elected officials is even more so. That is why voting in our elections is so important, because it's always easy to sit back and criticize and complain, but if you don't vote, then that was your choice. By voting, by looking at all of the candidates, looking at their experience, looking at their education, then you are putting your trust in that individual to look at all proposals put before the council, and the council members that are on those committees are placed on there because of their background, because of their education and their experience. And so transparency is critical, is vital, and I believe that the people, by attending your council meetings, that's the best way to get information on the decisions made by the Creek Nation. I do understand the frustrations of the at-large citizens. I myself have lived out of the jurisdiction, and experienced times when I had a need that could not be addressed simply because our programs follow rules, regulations by the funding agencies, and I understand that. But that doesn't address the needs of our at-large citizens. I've always thought and have discussed in the past with previous council members that there needs to be a way to designate funds that aren't tied to those rules and regulations of the funding agency, say HUD or HHS for child care, but to develop a plan where at-large citizens who have needs, emergency needs, can be addressed. And that can be done by designating funds for services and then giving those funds to the agencies or to the programs who already have the infrastructure to for these services. Let them use their application process, their eligibility, their everything they already have set in place to provide these services and to meet the needs of at-large citizens. Free press, that is it goes back to transparency. As a tribe, I know that our media, Muskogee Media, is funded by the tribe. And so therefore that's the thinking that, well, then we should have, or the nation should have a say-so in what is covered and how it's covered and what's reported. However, if you're wanting transparency, you also have to agree that free press is critical to getting information out that the citizens want. And so why not allow the citizens to vote for an amendment for free press? Well, my personal opinion, and I'm speaking as a citizen right now, is I have 3 grandchildren who have, their parents have been trying to get them enrolled with the Creek Nation and have to jump through hoops to get them enrolled. Even though I'm a citizen, my dad is a citizen, his mom and dad were citizens, you know, I mean, and then you have the freedmen descendants who have not even applied for citizenship, and that's my understanding, is that that's why I would say that they need to follow the same requirements to become a citizen, and that is to prove that you are a citizen of the Creek Nation.